hadn't been back in almost 10 years. Quiet Valley sat at the very end of a winding mountain road, so forgotten that even GPS gave up before you got close. My car rattled along the cracked asphalt, swallowed on both sides by thick pines. The deeper I drove, the heavier the silence pressed in. No radio signal, no cars, not even birdsong, just the hum of my tires on road and the memory of summers long past. When I finally rolled into town, it looked. Smaller houses stood slumped and crooked, like weary shoulders waiting to collapse. The old general store had its windows boarded. The gas station where we used to buy sodas was a hollow shell. But what unsettled me most wasn't the decay. It was the emptiness. Where were the people? I remembered kids running barefoot through dirt yards, elders smoking on porches, Sunday crowds filling the church. But now, I counted only a handful of faces staring at me with blank, suspicious eyes as I passed. Her house sat on the edge of the woods, a sagging two-story with faded green shutters. The front porch creaked under my weight, just like it used to when I was a child sneaking cookies from her kitchen. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something older like damp stone. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The lace curtains, the shelves of canned peaches, the quilts folded neatly on the couch. It felt as though she'd stepped out only minutes ago, but I knew she hadn't. Upstairs, in the bedroom where she died, I found the first sign of what was waiting for me. On the nightstand sat her leather-bound journal, open to a page marked with trembling handwriting. The last line read, "They came again last night. Their voices are sweet, but I know better. I pray she never comes back here. I pray she never hears them." The entry stopped there, and I realized with a cold knot in my stomach, she meant me. Over the next few days, I tried to settle her affairs. But the more I spoke to the few townsfolk left, the stranger it all felt. Every conversation carried gaps, like they were leaving out pieces of truth. Old Mrs. Collins muttered, "Your grandma was strong, stronger than most. But everyone leaves, one way or another." At the diner, the cook said flatly, "It's not death that empties this place. You'll see." I wanted to press them, but the way they looked at me, half pity, half warning, made me stay quiet. Back at the house, I dug into the journals my grandmother had written for decades, pages upon pages in her tidy script. Most of it was mundane weather, notes, recipes, little comments about me when I was small, but woven through, like dark threads in a tapestry, were entries about the presents. She wrote of seeing neighbors vanish into the woods at night, smiling as though in a trance. She described hearing voices calling from the trizzy, voices that sounded like loved ones long dead, and she wrote about the bargain. The presents, whatever it was, promised release from suffering. No more pain, no more loneliness, no more hunger or grief. People didn't die in Quiet Valley, they chose to join it. The first time I heard it myself, I was walking back from town at dusk. The path cut through tall grass, and the woods loomed close. At first I thought it was just wind in the trees, but then it formed into words, my name, soft, familiar. I froze. It was my grandmother's voice. "Come here, child, don't be afraid." I dropped the groceries in my arms. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it, wanted to run into those woods, but she was dead. I had buried her. I forced myself to keep walking, eyes fixed on the gravel road, whispering aloud just to drown it out. When I got back to the house, my hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the keys. That night, I tore through her journals. Somewhere in the back, I found the entry that explained everything. They do not only call, they can wear faces. They can wear memories. They take what you love most and offer it back until you cannot tell where they end and you begin. This is why so many choose them willingly. They are not taken, they surrender. And then, underlined twice, never answer, never follow, never look too long into their eyes. The deeper I read, the more I understood. My grandmother hadn't just been watching neighbors vanish. She had watched her own family, her husband, her brother, even her son, my father. One by one, they had gone into the mountains and never returned. I remembered growing up with questions nobody would answer. My father's absence explained away as he left for work. Now I knew the truth. He hadn't left us. He had chosen them. In the following nights, the voices grew stronger. Sometimes it was my grandmother, sometimes my father, sometimes even friends I knew were alive far from here. They whispered promises: you don't have to hurt anymore. We'll take care of you. Just one step into the woods. And with each night, the town grew quieter. Doors stayed locked. Curtains stayed drawn. The few who remained wore haunted expressions, as if they were only waiting their turn. I realized I wasn't just here to settle an estate. I was here to decide whether I would be the last of my family, or the next to join them. It happened 3 nights before I planned to leave. I woke to tapping on the window. Soft, deliberate. When I pulled back the curtain, I nearly screamed. My father stood outside. He looked exactly as I remembered from the one blurry photograph my grandmother kept. Broad shoulders, kind eyes, the same crooked smile. "It's me, sweetheart. Don't be afraid." His voice cracked with tenderness. He lifted his hand, palm out, like he was waiting for me to mirror him. For a moment, I wanted nothing more than to open the window, to fall into his arms, to finally have what I had missed all my life. But then I remembered the journal's warning. Never answer, never follow, never look too long. I squeezed my eyes shut, backed away, and prayed. When I opened them again, he was gone. The next day, I went into town. I confronted Mrs. Collins, the only elder left who seemed willing to speak. "Why doesn't anyone stop it?" I demanded. She shook her head slowly. "Child, you can't stop hunger. You can't stop the tide. This place is theirs, and always has been. We just learned to live beside them." Her eyes filled with tears. "Your grandma fought harder than anyone, but even she couldn't save them all." I realized then it wasn't about fighting. It was about resisting until you couldn't anymore. On my last night in Quiet Valley, the presence came for me one final time. The house was still. Midnight pressed heavy on the windows. Then I heard it. Not outside this time. Inside. Whispers curling down the hallway. Footsteps creaking the boards. I grabbed a flashlight and crept forward, every nerve on fire. At the end of the hall, in my grandmother's bedroom, the door stood ajar. Light spilled through. I pushed it open, and froze. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was my grandmother. She looked alive, her skin warm, her eyes soft, her hands folded in her lap. She smiled at me. "It's all right, child. I know you're tired. Come with me, and you'll never have to carry this alone again." The air thickened. My chest tightened. Tears welled in my eyes. I wanted so badly to believe it, but then I saw it. Her shadow. It stretched wrong across the floor, bending upward like claws. I dropped the flashlight when I looked up again. She was gone. Only the whisper remained, slithering through the dark. Soon I left Quiet Valley at dawn. I didn't pack much, just the journals and the clothes on my back. As I drove away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The town lay still and hollow, cradled in the mountains, but for a heartbeat, I thought I saw figures standing among the trees, watching, waiting. I don't know if I escaped, or if I only postponed the inevitable, because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear them. The voices, sweet, familiar, calling me home, and I know one day I may answer.
My name's Thomas. I spent 35 years in the mines of Harlan County. Down there, time didn't work like it does up here. You didn't measure it in clocks, you measured it by shifts, by breaks, by how many lamps burned out before the cage hauled you back up, and you learned to read the mountain's moods. A low groan in the walls, a whisper of falling dust. The way your boots vibrated when you stopped moving it all meant one thing: trouble. I still remember the day it happened. 12 years ago, we were working deep in Shaft 3. The seam was good, thick, but the mountain didn't want to give it up. The ceiling was restless. Every man there felt it in his gut. I told them we should back out. Caleb laughed. He always laughed in the dark, said it kept fear from sticking. Henderson shook his head, said the company wouldn't pay us to sit around. Then came the sound. A groan, long and low, like the mountain was sighing after holding its breath too long. And then, it gave way. The roof fell. Timbers snapped like matchsticks. Air turned black with dust so thick you couldn't see your own hands. The ground bucked under me, and all I could hear were screams cut off one by one, swallowed by thunder. 20-3 men buried alive. My brothers, my family, and me. I crawled through a seam so narrow I left skin on the walls. Crawled out into daylight, coughing up coal, dust, and blood. Some called me lucky, but surviving doesn't always feel like luck. Sometimes it feels like a curse. After that, I never went underground again. I tried to build a quiet life. My wife Sarah kept me steady for a while. She had a way of making the world feel softer, even when it wasn't. She passed 5 winters ago, and after that, the house was just empty. My kids had moved up north, chasing jobs the mines couldn't give. I was glad for that. Glad they never had to breathe coal, never had to carry what I carried. So it was just me, the house, and the hills. At first the silence felt like peace. Then it started to feel like the silence before a storm. It started with a helmet. One morning, I stepped out onto the porch, and there it was, sitting on the rail, beaded with doodah, not the kind we wore near the end. This one was old, real old. Leather strap cracked, lamp glass clouded, steel dented, and black with soot. When I picked it up, coal dust rubbed off on my fingers. Fresh, I looked around. Yard empty, road empty, no footprints in the dirt. I set it down inside, thinking maybe some kids were messing with me. But no kid would know what that kind of helmet even looked like. A week later, there was a pickaxe leaning against my fence. The haft worn smooth, the head rusted dark, too heavy for a prank dot, and then came the shovel. Then an old dented lunch pail, initials carved in the lidsi, our Caleb brains. I dropped it so fast, it clanged against the porch. My stomach turned cold. Caleb had been one of the 20-3 dot, and now his lunch pail was sitting at my door. That's when the noises started. At night, lying in bed, I'd hear it clang, 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 the sound of a pick biting stone. Then the scrape of shovels, boots crunching gravel, voices low, muffled, like men talking through walls. Sometimes they called my name. I'd sit up in bed, sweat cold on my neck, straining to hear. The house was still, the yard was still. But in the morning, the ground under the oak tree would be torn up, fresh shovel marks. Neat, as if someone had started digging. That's when I stopped sleeping. I went to see Pastor Jim. He'd grown up here, same as me. If anyone knew what was happening, it'd be him. He listened while I told him about the tools, the noises, the voices. When I finished, he just sat there, pale, hands folded tight. There's an old story, he said finally. My granddad told it to me. His granddad told it to him. About Shaft 3. I leaned forward. Go on. When the collapse happened, he said, some of the men begged for a way out. Begged so hard, they weren't just talking to God anymore. Something else answered. My chest tightened. What kind of something? His eyes dropped to the Bible on his desk. Older than God's word. Older than the mountains. A presence in the dark. It gave them a path out, but not for free. I swallowed hard. What did it take? A soul for a soul, he whispered. They walked out of that mine, but they were bound. And every so often, it calls for more. I didn't want to believe him, but I'd already heard the picks, seen the tools, and deep down, I knew he was right. 3 nights later, I saw them. Fog rolled thick across my yard, heavy enough to hide the fence, and out of it came shapes, men, helmets, glowing faint yellow, lamps flickering, faces gray, eyes hollow, moving in unison, and at the front Caleb, his voice scraped out of the dark. Tom, I froze. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Boss wants you, he said. That's due. I shook my head, heart pounding. I'm not going. He tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he nodded, double quotes, 3 nights. He said, make your house right. Then we walk. The fog thinned. They were gone, but I knew they'd be back. On the 3rd night, I didn't wait for them. I strapped on my helmet, picked up the rusted tools left in my yard, and walked down the old service road to Shaft 3. The boards across the mine mouth were broken, chain rusted through. Cold air poured out, fog curling at my boots. That it smelled like damp stone, like rust, like blood. I stepped inside. The air pressed heavy, thicker than water. Every step echoed off rotten timbers. My lamp threw a weak oval of light against black walls, and then I wasn't alone. Dot figures emerged from the dust. Miners, my brothers, their faces gray, helmets cracked, eyes glowing faint fire. Tom, Caleb rasped. His voice was layered, now his, and something deeper. You came, we knew you would. I gripped the pickaxe. What do you want? Their voices rose together. What we were promised. Freedom. And then the ground shook up from the far wall. A seam split open. Black smoke poured out, thick and writhing. It gathered, stacking higher, shaping itself into something that towered over us all. Eyes glowed red orange, like the fire inside a furnace. Its voice rumbled with the weight of shifting stone. They gave themselves to me, it said. I spared them, but the pact is not finished. A soul for a soul. You will take their place. Heat pressed against my face. My lungs burned with cold dust that wasn't there. The spirits stared at me, eyes pleading, chained by something older than death. I understood then, if I didn't go, they'd never be free. I dropped to my knees. Maybe this was what I deserved, to pay what they couldn't, to trade myself so they could finally rest. But then I thought of my wife. Sarah thought of my kids up north, alive and free. And I thought of my brothers, the men standing here, trapped in chains they never wanted. I couldn't let it end like this. I stood. If you want me, I shouted, you'll have to take me. But I'm not going quietly. I swung the pickaxe. It struck the floor with a spark brighter than it should have been. The spirits recoiled, the entity roared, the chamber trembling around us. I swung again. Rock cracked, light poured from the seam, searing white. The spirits screamed not in pain, but in release. Their chains snapped, their forms dissolving into dust. The entity writhed, shrinking, its furnace eyes dimming. The mountain groaned, the chamber collapsing. I ran. The tunnel shook, timbers snapping, stones crashing down. Dust filled my throat, blinding my eyes. Behind me, the entity bellowed, a sound like the earth itself tearing apart. I crawled, scraped, shoved myself toward the faint glow of daylight. Rocks slammed down inches from my head. My helmet cracked, lamps sputtering. Then air, cold, clean air. I burst out of the shaft as the entrance collapsed behind me. Sealing the darkness shut, I lay there on the dirt, coughing until I tasted blood, staring at the sky dot, and for the first time in years, the hills were silent. Since that night, the tools stopped appearing. The noises stopped. The fog doesn't roll into my yard anymore. I keep Caleb's old lunch pail on my shelf. The initials CRR still there, carved rough and deep. I touch them sometimes, when the nights get too quiet, and I tell myself the debt is paid. But sometimes, when the wind's just right, I think I hear it. A faint clang of a pick, a shovel scraping stone. And I wonder if I really ended it, or if the mountain is just waiting. Because the mountain is patient, and one day, it will come calling again. Asterisk, my name's Claire. I work as an audio archivist. Most people don't even know that's a job. Basically, I take old recordings, vinyl cassettes, Realtoryland convert them to digital. Museums, libraries, universities hire me to preserve history before it decays completely. It's quiet work. Long hours with headphones, listening to voices of people long dead, catching the crackle of time in every word. So when I got the call about a sanitarium archive in the Appalachians, I wasn't surprised. The client said they had a collection of tapes oral histories, patient recordings left behind after the sanitariums shut down in the 1950s. They wanted them digitized before mold and time destroyed them. The money was good. The catch, I'd have to work on site. The sanitarium was too isolated, too fragile to move the collection, so I packed my equipment, drove 3 hours up winding mountain roads, and pulled into a place that looked more like a mausoleum than a hospital. The building stood on a ridge, its windows hollow, its bricks eaten by moss. Locals called it Ashwood Sanatorium. A century ago, tuberculosis patients were sent here to recover in mountain air. Most never left. The front doors groaned open, and the air that poured out smelled of dust, rot, and something faintly sour, like wet soil. Inside, paint peeled in sheets, rust bled down walls from broken pipes. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of my boots on glass and plaster. The archivist in me was fascinated, the human in me, uneasy. The tape room was on the 3rd floor. Rows of metal shelves sagged under reels, hundreds of them, some labeled, some bare. My client had left me a folding table, power strips, and a box of supplies. I told myself it would just be another job, but the building already felt like it was listening. I set up my deck, loaded the first reel, and pressed play. Static hissed, long and steady. Then a voice broke through it, tired, breathing hard. This is Dr. Ellison, Ashwood Sanatorium, October 12, 1949. Patient 73 continues to exhibit auditory hallucinations. His words warbled, stretched thin. In the background, I heard coughing, then faint clicks, like someone snapping their tongue against their teeth. At first I thought it was distortion. Old tapes degrade, they shed oxide, stretch, warp. But then the clicks formed a rhythm, like syllables, like speech. And then, behind the doctor's words, I heard a whisper. A woman's voice, weak and gasping. Don't let it in. The tape cut. I sat back, heart pounding. It had to be contamination. An overdub, patients spoke while doctors recorded, nothing more. Still, something about that whisper clung to me. The next tape was worse. Another doctor's note. This time about fungal anomalies in lung tissue. He described spores that seemed to grow faster inside human hosts, weaving into bronchial tubes. In the background, coughs, wheezes, and underneath clicks. Dozens of them, layered, weaving like voices overlapping in a crowd. When I slowed the playback, the clicks stretched. And I could almost make out words. Cold, stay, dark. I ripped the headphones off. The room was silent. Dust swirled in the weak light. I told myself I was tired, imagining things. But when I pressed play again, the clicks picked up faster, sharper, and in between them, a man's broken whisper. Help me breathe. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I dug into Ashwood's history. Turns out, it was notorious. Over 5,000 patients had died there, more than any other sanatorium in the state. Rumors swirled about experimental treatments. Some said doctors tried to surgically remove lungs infected with fungus. Others said they burned entire wings to stop outbreaks. But no one wrote about what happened to the bodies. The local papers just said sanitized and buried. Sanitized, a word that meant erased. Day 3, I played a real marked patient 112. At first, just coughing. Ragged, wet, then a girl's voice, maybe 15. "It's inside me," she whispered. "It talks when I sleep. Click, click. Sometimes, it sounds like my mama. Click, click, click. She says she misses me, but she's been dead 3 years." My stomach turned. The girl coughed, long and deep. When she inhaled again, the sound wasn't human. It was wet, crackling, like wind through reeds. And then, in a low, rasping mimicry, the clicks formed words. "Mama loves you." I slammed stop. The tape spun down. The silence in the room was louder than the recording. And then, faint, so faint I thought I imagined it, a whisper right beside me. "Mama loves you." I checked my equipment. Nothing was wrong. No bleed from wires, no playback glitches. But when I leaned close to the reels, I smelled it. That sour, damp odor, like mushrooms, like earth turned over after rain. The tape wasn't just tape anymore. Something was growing on it thin. White filaments, like spider silk, spreading across the reels. I pulled my hands back fast. The fungi wasn't dead. It had survived, and it was using the tapes to speak. By the 5th day, I couldn't stop. Every reel revealed more whispers, more memories. Patients gasping last words. Doctors begging forgiveness. Children crying for parents long gone. The fungi mimicked them all, stitching voices together into a chorus of the dead. And the more I listened, the more it changed. It began to answer me. When I whispered, "Who are you?" the clicks shifted. "We are memory." When I asked, "What do you want?" the whispers swelled. "Breathe with us." That night I dreamed of lungs sprouting white tendrils, growing out through ribs, wrapping around tape reels, spooling memories forever. I found the final box in a locked cabinet. Its reels were darker, coated in dust, thick as ash. Label. Ellison last recording. My hands shook as I threaded it. Static, then the doctor's voice. "This is Dr. Ellison. The fungi is not an infection. It is a host. We are the vessels. It consumes the body. Yes, but it preserves the mind. Every thought, every memory, absorbed. It is building something, coughing, choking. Then clicks. Dozens, then hundreds, rushing like a swarm." Ellison gasped, his final words barely audible. "We thought we were curing them, but we were feeding it." The tape ended, but the clicking did not. It kept going. From the reels themselves, whispering not through headphones, but in the room. I should have left, burned the reels, called someone, but I didn't. I sat there, surrounded by shelves of tapes, all of them sprouting white threads, all of them whispering in 1,000 voices at once. My parents, my childhood friends, voices of strangers describing their last breaths. They weren't random, they were memories, and they wanted me, us. The whispers pressed against my skull. Every inhale tasted of damp soil. My lungs felt heavy, as though spores clung to them. I ripped the headphones off, staggered to the door, but the whispers followed. That was 3 months ago. I left Ashwood behind, told myself I'd never go back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it click, click, through the static of my own speakers. Through recordings I know I never touched. The fungi followed me. It clung to the reels, to my equipment, maybe even to me. And now, when I breathe in the dark, I hear voices. Voices of people I've never met, whispering secrets they never told anyone. The sanatorium's patients, the doctors, the dead they live in inside me. And when I cough, when my chest rattles, I swear I hear it clicking back. "Breathe with us." I had driven lonely mountain roads before, but that afternoon felt different. The further I climbed, the quieter the world became. The hum of the engine and the crackle of gravel under my tires were the only sounds. No birds, no wind, just silence, pressing so heavy it felt like a second passenger. When I reached the ridge, the church came into view. A small, sagging building of white boards and peeling paint, leaning steeple, cutting the sky like a crooked finger. The graveyard wrapped it on both sides, fenced in by half-rotten rails. The stones there were crooked, slanted as if trying to crawl away from the earth that held them. Every September, we gathered here for the reenactment. It wasn't big 20 men, maybe 30, half in blue and half in gray. Families came too, spreading blankets by the fence, letting children bang on toy drums. It wasn't about sides. It was about ritual, about pretending history could be contained in play acting. But that year, there was something new. A dusty blue truck waited by the gate, crates tarped in the back. And leaning against it, a man, thin, older than any of us, shoulders drawn tight inside a wool coat, even though the day was warm. He wasn't watching the crowd like a guest. He was staring at the ground, as if the dirt itself might speak. Captain Ellis nudged me. New recruit, he muttered, twirling the waxed tip of his mustache. Name's Whitcomb. Says he's a historian. Wants to join us? I shrugged. Historians come all the time. Ellis smiled, didn't reach his eyes. This one says he's here to finish something. The way he said it made my stomach turn colder than the air. By dusk, we stood in lines on the grass, muskets raised. The kids with drums shuffled nervously. The crowd by the fence was thin but polite. Ellis barked the order. Company Our volley cracked, muzzle smoke rolled across the yard, and then something answered. From the trees beyond the fence came another volley. Sharper, louder, not timed with ours. Voices followed, strained grunts, the sound of men falling. For a heartbeat, it sounded like a real battle, one not scripted for entertainment. The crowd froze. The reenactors looked at one another, and then Whitcomb stepped forward. Not ghosts, he said, his voice calm but cutting. Not men. This ground remembers. Violence burns itself into soil and stone. What you heard is the land replaying hurt. We stood silent. You've been feeding it every year with your game, he added, and now, it's waking. No one laughed. Not one man lifted his musket again. That night, lanterns burned low and chili went cold in bowls no one touched. The kids had been sent home with the pastor's wife. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Whitcomb sat among us. Coat still buttoned, face half in shadow. When I was 16, he began. I came here on a dare. The church had no roof then. The moon lit the pews like bones. I walked the graveyard and heard volleys that didn't stop. Saw shapes moving through the fog. Men falling, men rising. Not souls, not spirits. Just pain, replayed. A bruise in the earth. He looked at us, eyes sharp. I've spent 40 years thinning it, stitching wounds that don't want to close. Every year I borrow your reenactment to hold the ritual together, but the wound is stubborn. And tonight, he trailed off, staring at the fog. Tonight, it's restless. He pulled the tarp from his truck. Inside were relics, original cartridge boxes, torn flags, stained cloth, folded neat. They weren't reproductions. They were the real thing. We must show the land how to end, he said, or it will replay until it devours what's left of us. At midnight, I walked the fence with him. The graveyard looked different by lantern light. Shadows leaned longer than the stones that cast them. Fog pooled thick, swallowing everything beyond the rails. Touch it, Whitcomb said. I pressed my palm to a post. It vibrated faintly, like something breathing. You hear them? He asked. I did, not words, but sounds. Boots, scraping gravel, men groaning, weight shifting in the dark. If you see something that hurts to look at, he whispered, look anyway. What you refuse to face grows teeth. We walked the rest of the line in silence. Not even an owl broke the stillness. The morning came gray. Fog sat low over the yard. So heavy the stones looked like knees jutting from a shroud. We chewed hardtack and drank bitter coffee. Whitcomb tied strips of cloth to 6 stones. Names carved faint. Harrow, Pike, Barnes, Anchors, he said. Ellis called us to formation. His mustache twitched, but his voice was steady. Simple skirmish, he said. Then we eat, we raised muskets, fired. Our volley cracked, and then the ground shuddered. From the tree line. Something pressed forward. A shimmer in the fog, shaped like men but wrong. Bayonets glinting where no steel existed. Rifles lifted where no hands held them. The reenactment was over. One boy stumbled, musket dropping. A welt rose across his shoulder as if struck by invisible hands. He screamed. The women cried out. The men staggered. They're here, Whitcomb said, voice steady. Don't fight. Give them an ending. But instinct screamed otherwise. Big Daniel, a man who laughed at everything, raised his musket again. The air slammed into him like a wave, throwing him to the dirt. The shimmered line pressed closer. The fog hissed like steam over iron. Ellis looked sick. Then, with a strength I'll never forget, he stepped forward, sheathed his sword, and raised his hat. We yield, he said. Whitcomb barked. Fold the flag. I ran to the post. The cloth was damp and heavy. My chest felt crushed by unseen weight. But I folded triangle after triangle, seam tucked in. Whitcomb tied the last strip of cloth to a stone. His tin box leaked the smell of vinegar and iron. Lay it down, he said. One by one. Cartridge boxes dropped into the dirt, bayonets unhooked, placed carefully, drums silenced. The sound of surrender was louder than any gunfire. The afterimage buckled, wavered, then began to thin. Like fog warming in sun, the weight left my chest. The boy's welt faded, the fog curled away. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was relief. Whitcomb sagged, sweat soaking his collar. It will hold, he whispered. until the scar itches again. But someone must remind the land how to finish. He pressed a strip of cloth into my hand. Stiff, stained, smelling of vinegar. Keep this, not because it's magic, because it reminds you war must end. We packed in silence. The children carried by. The men avoided one another's eyes. At the gate, I pressed my hand to the post. No vibration, just wood, just mourning. On the road home, I pulled the cloth from my haversack. In sunlight, the stain glowed red-brown. I didn't burn it, not because I believed in charms, because I believed in endings. And sometimes, when the wind shifts in late September, I hear it one phantom volley rolling across the ridge. No answer, no screams. Just silence that feels finished. Asterisk, I was born in a holler so deep the sun had to fight its way down every morning. A place where mountains pressed close, where the air always smelled faintly of damp leaves and iron. My family never really left. Some worked odd jobs, some hunted, some just drank their lives away. But the land, we always came back to the land. When my mother died, I came back to the old house sagged at the edge of the woods, shutters rotting, porch steps groaning under my weight. But it wasn't the rot that unsettled me. It was the silence. The holler was too quiet. Not the natural quiet of rural life, but something heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. I knew that feeling. My family had lived with it for generations. We were cursed or gifted, depending who you asked. The blood in our veins carried a trait no doctor could name. My grandmother called it the sight. My uncle called it a curse. I called it the family burden. We didn't just remember history. We relived it. Touch a stone, a doorframe, even the dirt, and we might see what it had witnessed: joy, sorrow, but more often, violence. It was never gentle, and it was never optional. The first night back, I unpacked in the old bedroom. The wallpaper was still peeling, water stained from decades of leaks. I pressed my hand against the windowsill, out of habit. It hit me like a hammer. Flashes, screams, a woman running barefoot through the woods, hair tangled with blood, a hand gripping her shoulder. Then darkness. I staggered back, clutching my chest, gasping like I'd been the one dragged into the trees. That was how the burden worked. It didn't just show you, it made you feel it. When I came to, sweat poured down my face. The window was quiet again, but outside, the woods rustled, as if they knew I'd seen. My grandmother was the only one still alive who truly understood. She sat in her rocker by the fire, a quilt over her knees, eyes cloudy with age but sharp underneath. They're louder now, aren't they? She rasped. I nodded. My throat was raw. I saw a girl. Someone dragged her. She cut me off. Not someone, the land. I stared at her. This holler's been feeding on grief since before we settled here. Every time blood spills, it soaks deeper. And now it calls, it wants more. Her hands shook as she clutched mine. It don't show you these things for nothing. It shows you so you'll act. If we don't end it, child, it'll take us next. Her words lingered long into the night. The burden doesn't wait for permission. The next day, I was chopping wood by the shed when I leaned on the axe handle to catch my breath. My palm touched the worn wood, and the world split open. I was no longer in daylight. I was in the dark, stumbling through leaves. The axe in my hand wasn't mine, it was rusted, dripping. At my feet lay a boy, his chest heaving shallowly, eyes wide with terror. Then the vision snapped, and I was back in the yard. My stomach heaved. I vomited in the dirt until I was empty. But the worst part wasn't the gore. It was the feeling, the rush of hunger that wasn't mine. The land feeding through me, just for a second, and I knew with sick certainty, this wasn't just memory. It was still happening. At dusk, I walked down to the old Collins place, where the only other family still hung on. Mrs. Collins was bent and brittle as bark, her voice a whisper. "You've seen it?" she said before. I even opened my mouth. I nodded. "They say it's a spirit," she murmured, "but it ain't a ghost. Ghosts pass on. This thing don't. It lingers. It remembers every scream, every tear, and it uses your bloodline to keep its hunger fed." Her eyes welled. "Your father, he saw too much. That's why he went into those woods and never came back." Her words cracked something in me. All my life, I'd been told he'd left, abandoned us. But now, maybe he'd just become another offering. The visions didn't let me sleep. Over the next week, they came faster, sharper, like the land was forcing me to bear its stories. The hanging tree, I touched the barn door and saw a man swinging from a tree, neck snapping as children watched from the bushes. His eyes were mine for an instant before the rope broke. Footsteps in the riverbed, walking by the creek. I heard boots slapping wet stones, but the water was empty until red stains floated past. vanishing before they reached me. The bloody quilt. My grandmother's quilt grew damp in my hands. A vision showed a mother wrapping her dead infant in it, humming a lullaby until the fabric was soaked through. The unfinished prayer in church. When I touched the pulpit, I heard a voice chanting scripture that broke into screams halfway through. The pews echoed with phantom applause. The boy in the field, leaning on the fence post. I saw a boy digging furiously at the soil, crying out that something underground was calling his name. He vanished mid-scream. The midnight knock at 3 a.m. Knocking rattled my bedroom wall. When I pressed my palm against it, a vision flared, bloodied fists pounding from the other side, begging to be let in. The shadow at the bed's foot. I woke to see a figure standing by my bed, only to blink and realize it wasn't a man. It was the shape of the land itself. Hills and branches forming a body. The father's voice finally. I heard my father's voice calling me from the woods. Come here, son. It's easier if you don't fight. But his words bent wrong, stretched like the land was learning to mimic love. Each vision left me weaker. My body ached, my mind frayed. The burden was pulling me toward the same fate as the rest of my bloodline. Among my mother's things, I found a leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, handwriting frantic. They come at night, it read, not men, not beasts. The land itself, it wears faces, it whispers promises. Our blood shows us the truth, but also binds us to it. If we don't sever the tie, it will take every one of us. At the bottom of the last page, scrawled, the land remembers. But memory can be broken. My grandmother said the old ways still had power. We gathered that night at the family plot. She, my uncle, and Mitha, last 3 bearers of the burden. We laid out relics from generations. Father's watch, mother's comb, a rusted knife, the quilt. Each object tied to pain the land had stolen. The air grew heavy. The fog thickened. The earth itself seemed to pulse. Shadows gathered at the edge of the clearing, faces of the lost eyes hollow, and behind them, something larger, shapeless, its body made of hills and smoke, its voice rumbling like shifting stone. You cannot cut me out, it growled. I am the land. I am every scream you have ever given me. But my grandmother's voice rose above it. She chanted words older than scripture, hands shaking as she poured salt and ash across the ground. I gripped the quilt, my father's watch clenched in my fist, and shouted, you don't own us. The air split. A roar shook the trees. The figures shrieked and dissolved into mist. The shape buckled, broke apart, its furnace-like eyes dimming. The ground stilled. The night went quiet. When I opened my eyes, the fog was gone. My grandmother lay slumped, breath shallow but steady. My uncle wept quietly. The relics were ashes, smoldering faint in the dirt. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was peace. But peace is never permanent. I left the holler weeks later, packed only what I needed, leaving the house to rot into the earth. Yet sometimes, even far away, when the night is too still, I feel it. The hum in the ground, the weight of eyes in the dark, the echo of my father's voice. The land is patient, and memory never dies easy. If the burden ever wakes again, it will come for me first, and I don't know if I'll have the strength to stop it twice.